It was the German philosopher George Hegel who said that what we learn from history is that we do not learn from history. Now, strictly speaking, that statement is not always true, especially in our personal and professional lives, right? For example, I had a really bad car accident when I was 17 years old, almost died that night. And ever since, I've been trying to stay on the correct side of the road and stay out of that kind of trouble. I learned from that moment. Or there was that time early on in my ministry when I was conducting a graveside service for a grieving family. I was young and hip and with it at those times, and there I was, stood in Belfast City Cemetery with my iPad, flicking through the electronic pages of the document on which I had typed every word of that service, hoping not to make a mistake, because that is every pastor's nightmare, that you would make that kind of error whenever you're trying to conduct a service for a grieving family. I was flicking through the pages of the service. Everything was going so well, and I came to the prayer of committal right at the end of the service. And I was about a third of the way through it, and I flicked over to what should have been the last page, and there it was. Nothing. I was caught mid-committal prayer with nothing. Now, thankfully, I had already done about 20 such services that year, and I was able to pull some words resembling what should have been on my screen to make the final prayer of committal in that service. But ever since, I have printed every single service. Again, I learned from my history. But I suppose Hegel was not really referring to an individual's ability to learn from their mistakes. I think he was talking more about the tendency we have as human societies to repeat our mistakes as history progresses. For example, in my homeland of Northern Ireland, there are whole generations of people, my own generation included. There are entire communities that can tell you their stories of tragedy and loss from the 30 years of the Northern Ireland Troubles. And yet, in those generations and in those communities, there are still people who would pick up their weapons and do it all over again. Maybe Hegel was right after all. What we learn from history is that we do not learn from history. But what if we did? What if we could hear the voices of those who made the journey before us? What are the things that they would say to us? We don't have to work our imaginations too hard to find that out. We only have to think about how we raise our children and our grandchildren. We are constantly trying to pass on the lessons that we have learned in a way that will either save our most precious little ones from making the same or similar mistakes that we have, or we pass on those lessons that will be helpful to those young people, maybe open doors for them as they navigate their way through life. I don't know whether you know this or not, but the book of Deuteronomy is a book written with that very question in mind. Israel is asking the question, what if we could hear the voices of those that went before us? What would they say? Now, why on earth would they be asking that question? Well, it's because when the book of Deuteronomy is written, Israel is in exile. That's right. You might think that Deuteronomy is chronologically the next book written in the story at the start of the Bible, but that's not the case. It is a book written by a historian during Israel's Babylonian exile, literally hundreds of years after the Exodus and their entrance into the Promised Land. These are a people now for whom a lot of water has passed under the bridge since they entered the Promised Land. And as they find themselves in exile, they are a people who have had their city attacked, their temple destroyed, their possessions taken away from them, and who themselves have been marched off and taken in to this Babylonian captivity. They were a people whose ancestors had been liberated from slavery hundreds of years before, and now they found themselves in captivity again. They've lost it all. They are down and out. And they have been left wondering, where did it all go wrong? How did we end up in this place? And where on earth is the God who made covenant with our forefathers? It's into these questions that the Deuteronomic historian writes. He's looking back and listening for the answers that only those who have walked a similar path before can give. This historian is looking back, seeking answers to the questions that God's people so very often ask when things have gone completely wrong, when it feels like all is lost and everything that they have known is breaking down. Because when it feels like God has left the building, when everything that you have pinned your identity on as God's people feels like it is crumbling away, it is only natural to ask, well, who are we now? And how are we called to live in this moment? In the passage that we've read today in our service, the historian is getting to the very crux of the answers to that question. Who are you now? And how are you called to be in this moment? What does the Lord require of you? Walk faithfully. Serve the Lord with all of your heart and soul. Keep the commandments of God. Circumcise your hearts and don't be stubborn any longer. These people were being held in captivity by their Babylonian captors. Their world and their way of being had been changed dramatically. They were in a state of disorientation, and the words spoken to them as they listened to the voices of those who had gone before them was a word that simply called them to maintain their faith. Hold on. Don't give up. Keep the commands. Live with integrity. Never tire of doing the right thing, no matter what it costs you. And why? Well, because the Lord your God is the God of gods, is the Lord of lords. God is great. God is mighty. God is awesome. God cannot be bought or sold with a price. God shows no partiality. God is the one who looks out for those whose backs are against the wall. The voices of Israel's history were the very voices that could attest to that. When they were in slavery, God liberated them. When they had to find their way across the Red Sea, God parted it for them. When they were hungry, manna rained from heaven. When they needed commandments to help all of those unique people live together in community, well, God gave 10 of them, right? The voices of those who had journeyed through the times of struggle and darkness before were saying to those who were struggling in exile, hold on and keep faith. And my friends, the voices of those who have gone before us, the voices that speak to us today in our own times, are saying exactly the same thing. If you're struggling today with the changes that are taking place in our world all around us, that things seem so different from anything you've ever known before, hold on and keep faith. If you feel like God has left the building and you're wondering who you are called to be in this moment, you know what? Hold on and keep the faith. If you're tempted to give it all up, to walk away from this story you've been a part of, and to give in to the temptation to try and make your own way in this world, if that is your temptation, hold on and keep the faith, because God is faithful. That is the word that was spoken to Israel in their exile, and that is the word that has been spoken to generation after generation of God's people ever since. Hold on and keep faith. Even when life stinks, even when you feel like you're lost, hold on and keep faith. But there's more. Because Israel was never called to a life of personal piety alone. Those people were never to be those that only worked out their own individual salvation. No, they were to emulate the heart of their God for the struggling in their midst. I mean, yes, the message was always hold on and keep faith, but that was immediately followed by the words, don't you dare keep it to yourself. God is the one who executes justice for the widow and the orphan, says the Deuteronomic historian. He's the one who loves the strangers, providing for them food and clothing. And then comes verse 19 from our reading. You shall also love the stranger, for you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. God's people are called to hold on to their faith, to keep faith in the hardest of times. Yes, that much is true. They're called to continue living into their holy habits of the faith. Those that have been handed on generation after generation. Yes, that is true. And part of that is the call to keep on joining in with the work of God, caring for those who are on the margins, caring for the foreigner, for those who have been trampled on in life. God's people were never to be those who hoarded their stuff and their things for themselves alone. They were always called to share it generously and extravagantly, just as God had shared God's own love generously and extravagantly with them first. My friends, we are not called to hoard and to hide our stuff for ourselves alone. No, we are called to give generously and to share our lives and our resources so that the hungry might eat, so that the stranger or the foreigner might be welcomed in. You know what? If we listen closely to what the Deuteronomic historian is writing, if we pay attention to what the writer is doing, we will understand that he's listening to voices of experience, voices that have traveled a road before him. And he will listen to what they have to say. And that is when the world seems upside down and everything seems different and wrong and we are frustrated and we are on the edge of giving up hope. We are to hold on and keep faith. We are to keep on doing the right thing. Keep on living into those holy habits. Keep on gathering for worship. Keep on studying and developing our deeply rooted journeys of discipleship. And we are to give of ourselves to those whose backs are against the wall all around us. That's what it is to hold on, to keep faith. That's what it is to make a difference in the world in the name of God. So today, whatever's going on for you, however you're feeling as you listen in to this sermon, I want you to hear that if you at home right now are struggling, wondering how you're going to keep this journey going, wondering if there's any future in it, let's listen to the voices of those that have gone long before us, who testify faithfully that God is with us and will never leave us. And therefore we are to hold on, keep faith, and to never keep it to ourselves. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Friends, at the end of our sermon and our digital service every week, we want you to take what has been said and to think a little bit more about it. And there is a lot in this Deuteronomy text and in this sermon for us to think about. So here are 2 or 3 questions for you to think through. I don't want you to feel pressure to work through them all, but if you can, go for it. But look at these questions and start thinking about how you can respond to what we have said here today.